If you exclude food services, because we do not have a federal program for our food services different, if you exclude transportation and debt retirement, bond issues, in the case of Edmonton, 92 cents of the dollar that the board spends is planned for by the schools, and the budget goes to the board by name of school. Now, nobody understands a billion-dollar budget. Well, I shouldn't say that. Maybe the board members do. But what the people do understand is their own school community. And if you understand your school community, and you see all of that in print, it adds up to 92 cents. And the other 8 cents on the dollar is spent for the district services. Then you're really dealing with an allocation formula.
Mike Strobitsky was our superintendent for more than 20-some years. He's known for, being the founder or the guru of site-based decision-making. But when Michael Strobitsky came in, his vision wasn't just about site-based decision-making. It really was about an empowered organization, and he had a vision of what he wanted to accomplish. And I think because he was with our district for 20-some years, he was able to establish that culture. But some of the big ideas that came from Mike was that concept of site-based decision-making. That idea that he had a clear idea of what the results were that he wanted to achieve, but he said, you know what, my results are your process. I don't care how you get there, you just need to get there. He really founded the notion of principal as decision maker. He was frustrated with, the fact that we had barriers, bureaucracy, policies in place that weren't allowing us to achieve the outcomes. So he said he's going to allocate dollars out to the schools or to the locations where the decisions were actually being made about students. So that had to be the classroom and the schools. He was very much a believer in stakeholder involvement and decision making, and really moved forward a balance between accountability but also flexibility. So some of the lessons learned out of the site-based decision making, I'll tell you as a principal, even as a teacher, I felt empowered. Every day that I went to work, I felt that I ultimately could make the decisions that were best going to move my school forward. And the power about site-based decision making is you have the local autonomy to say, here's the dollars that I've been allocated. And I'll give an example. In a school of about 300 years ago, I might have been given $3.5 million. And I was empowered to say, look at your results, look at your local context, and you make the best decisions with your staff and your community on what best is going to have the impact on student achievement. We were empowered to plan collaboratively with our staffs. Empowerment in site-based decision-making isn't about giving the dollars to the school principal and then having them decide. It was about creating that culture of empowerment. And it was that whole concept of tight ends, loose means. There were structures in place, but they were means-focused and allowed that flexibility at individual sites. And it really was about course services as well. Not all the dollars under Mike went out to the schools. There were some that were centrally located, and that was based on an ability to provide core services like professional development in a balanced and equitable way across schools. Students were always at the core. Priorities, our district has core priorities that guide decision making. But each school and decision unit with their dollars was required to align to what the 3 priorities would be. And they were responsible for establishing a plan for how they were going to get there and measures for how they were going to demonstrate success. Didn't have to look the same, but they had to be in place. And then, after a plan was developed, we were encouraged to do our budget planning. Very different way of doing things. Plan and then allocate versus allocate and plan. It was about your plan and your needs driving the decision making that needed to go around resources. And then every year, principals would all come together with the Board of Trustees and they'd have a results review, and they would be accountable for what their plans were, what their measures were, and how they achieved. And so there was flexibility, but there was also accountability built into the system.
I have visited the Michael Strobitsky School a number of times. I spent about a day a week I'm in Edmonton. The school bears my name, and I'm honored because I left the district 20 years ago. And when I go through that school and I see what is going on and what the students are doing, I'm not sure I would have applied to teach in that school. I also know that Lisa wouldn't have picked me. Because the energy and the students, it's just a sight to behold. But I want you to know that all the people who are there because they knew what they were getting into. This is what they wanted. Now, as an individual, yes, I'll claim credit for being an architect that allows more people to do their thing. And their thing might not be my thing, but that's not the issue. I can tell you that as a teacher, it took me 2 months, all my life. Grade 6, I wanted to be a teacher. I finally fulfilled that. I became an elementary teacher, and within 2 months, I ran into something called the organization. And after having taught elementary, junior high, special ed, I got to the exalted land of a senior high, a brand new school. And in that first year, as a history major, one of the first units was a unit on World War I. And a brand new school, I walked into my room and there were the maps on the floor. So I said to the principal, you know, I want the map racks mounted. He pulled out an acro file, that shows you how far back, and showed me that he had sent in a requisition to maintenance to get the map racks mounted. He says, what do you want me to do? I mean, he'd done his job. But I wasn't about to be put off, so I phoned maintenance and I said, you know, these map racks, they're on the floor, I'd like them mounted. And the fellow says, you know, that's the problem with you teachers. You don't realize that in maintenance with the climate, with our climate, we do the outside structural elements every 5 years. And then with the money that's remaining, we paint the inside every 17 years, whether it's needed or not. And he said, we get to do that kind of work in the wintertime. So he said, your maps will be mounted sometime in December. I said, World War I will be over by then. So we weren't allowed into the school on the weekends, but community use of schools was permitted. And I snuck into the community use entrance, made my way to my classroom, had the tools, drilled the concrete block, plugged the walls, and mounted the map racks. And on Monday, I'm telling you, World War I started. And I'm so proud of myself because after the lessons, and we spent a week on that, everything went so well, and I figured how much better, how much more meaningful. And I know it's old technology, but there it was. And now I wish that that was the end of the story. A couple of months later, I'm near the end of a classroom. There's a class session with my class, and there's a knock at the door, and a fellow walks in with a white uniform with a 16-ounce Stanley hammer in his holster, holding a citation called a work order. And he says, where are the map racks? And like a dummy, I said, there. No, the ones to be mounted. I said, there. Who did it? I'm going to the union. And I learned in a psych class, and I asked him his name. What's your name? Cass. Cass, you're destroying me in front of a class. Why don't you go to the staff room, pour yourself a coffee, in 10 minutes I'll be there and we'll talk about this. So we did, and I said, Cass, look, I'm trying to teach. The kids needed it. Look, go check it out. If it's not done right, turn me into the union. If it is done right, I'll sign your work order and we'll be friends. And we were. From there on in, for the next 20-some years, Cass and I were friends. I only say that because, for me, if you saw something that had to be done, you did it. Now, unfortunately, procedures didn't mean that much to me. And when I got to work in Central Admin, after very little school experience, I had a $35,000 budget. The previous year, the school said they needed $365,000. And so the night the board passed the budget, there was $35,000 of satisfaction and $330,000 of dissatisfaction. So I figured, what a dumb setup. So I took the $35,000 and I just divided it by the number of kids in each school and sent the money to the schools and said, you know, order your maps and globes. One of the people said, you can't do that. How do you know they're only going to approve $35,000? Well, I said, do you think we'll get more than 10% increase? He said, no. I said, fine, we'll distribute 38.5 and ask him to order in priority order, because if there's a cutback, anyway, I got into trouble, did one simple little thing, and I was on my way out. And then by a chance thing, somebody resurrected me and I stayed on in Central. And 4 years later, I was the superintendent of the district, knew very little about it. And I'm not going to go into why you would do this or how you would do this. Just remember this, that when I found myself as a superintendent, on the one hand, we had so many people who were trying to make what didn't work, work. And that's no small feat. It's also very demoralizing. And sometimes it did work, but for the most part, we were in crisis mode. At the same time, I would talk to people about doing things a different way. And finally, one morning, my senior staff, I kept saying it'll work. They said it wouldn't. And I said, it hit me this weekend. I say it'll work. You say it won't. With you, it won't. And then we came up with a strategy by which, and I said, no, come on, you're doing the jobs you were hired to. What I want to see happen is different. It's a deviation. And you know what you do with deviance. You try to pull it back in. And I want to skip over to when we were going to launch district-wide. Forget about the preparation and everything that was. And one of the things I knew, people would want to know whether this made a difference, whether this was going to help, whether this was better, whether this was worse. And we did a number of things, some of which were so wrong. But we did some things, we got payoffs that were absolutely brilliant, far more than we expected. And one of the things we did was we said, how would we know if it turned out better? Indeed, the board, when they passed going district-wide, they said 5 years from now, we want a study of whether it's better. Well, I knew as a history major that 5 years from now, the one group would pick their ammunition and say this worked, and the other would pick theirs and say this didn't work. So we took what I will call a status report of where we were. And here's what we did in the simplest thing. We said, what is it we're trying to achieve? And ours was very simple. Initially, it was a 2-pager with more language, but it was in 8 things. If we succeeded in 8 things, we thought there'd be a tomorrow and I would still have a job. One was, we wanted student achievement. We wanted student attitudes. We wanted staff performance and staff attitudes. We wanted the parent attitudes, and we wanted the community attitudes, because the community at that time, we had low local power of taxation. We also wanted to look after the district's physical assets. You know, we may have billions of dollars of property, but if a $30 item with board logo shows up in a pawn shop, guess what the headline is, okay?